The Sorcerer's Stone. Chapter 15, The Forbidden Forest, by J.K. Rowling. Things couldn't have been worse. Filch took them down to Professor McGonagall's study of the first floor, where they sat and waited without saying a word to each other. Hermione was trembling. Excuses, elbows, and white cover-up stories chased each other around Harry's brain, each more freebie than the last. He couldn't see how they were going to get out of trouble this time. They were cornered. How could they have been so stupid as to forget the cloak? There was no reason on earth that Professor McGonagall would accept for them being out of bed and creeping around the school in the dead of night, let alone being up the tallest astronomy tower, which was out of bounds except of classes. And Norbert and the invisibility cloak, they might as well be packing their bags already. Had Harry thought that things could have been worse, he was wrong. When Professor McGonagall appeared, she was leading Neville. "Harry!" Neville burst out the moment he saw the other two. "I was trying to find you to warn you. I heard Malfoy saying he was going to catch you. He said you had a drag." Harry shook his head violently to shut Neville up, but Professor McGonagall had seen. She looked more likely to breathe fire than Norbert, and she towered over the three of them. "I would never have believed it of any of you. Mr. Filch says you were at the astronomy tower. It's 1:00 in the morning. Explain yourselves." It was the first time Hermione had ever failed to answer a teacher's question. She was staring in her sleepers, as still as the statue. "I think I've got a good idea of what's been going on," said Professor McGonagall. "It doesn't take a genius to work it out. You fed Draco Malfoy some cock and bull story about a dragon. Tried to get him out of bed and into trouble. I've already caught him. I suppose you think it's funny that Longbottom had heard the story and believed it too." Harry caught Neville's eye and tried to tell him without words that this wasn't true, because Neville was looking stunned and hurt. Poor bluttering Neville. Harry knew that it must have cost him to try and find them in the dark to warn them. "I'm disgusted," said Professor McGonagall. "4 students out of bed in one night. I've never heard of such a thing before. You're Miss Granger. I thought you had more sense. As for you, Mr. Potter, I thought Gryffindor meant more to you than this. All 3 of you will receive detentions. Yes, you too, Mr. Longbottom. Nothing gives you the risk to right to walk around school at night, especially these days. It's very dangerous, and 50 points will be taken from Gryffindor." 50! Harry gasped. They would lose the lead. The lead he'd won in the last Quidditch match. 50 points each, said Professor McGonagall, breathing heavily through the long pointed nose. "Professor, please, you can't." "Don't tell me what I can and can't do, Potter. Now get back to bed, all of you. I've never been more ashamed of Gryffindor students." 150 points lost. That put Gryffindor in last place. In one night, they'd ruin any chance Gryffindor had had for the Cow's Cup. Harry felt as though the bottom had dropped off his stomach. How could they ever make up for this? Harry didn't sleep all night. He could hear Neville sobbing into his pillow for what seemed like hours. Harry couldn't think of Neville like himself, was dreading the dawn. What would happen when the rest of Gryffindor found out what they'd done? At first, Gryffindor's passing the giant hourglasses that recorded house points. Next day, thought there'd been a mistake. How could they suddenly have 150 points fewer than yesterday? And then the story started to spread. Harry Potter, the famous Harry Potter, their hero of 2 Quidditch matches, had lost them all house points. Him and a couple of other stupid first years. From being one of the most popular and admired people at the school, Harry was suddenly the most hated. Even Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs turned on him, because everyone had been longing to see Slytherin lose the Cow's Cup. Everywhere Harry went, people pointed and didn't trouble to lower their voices as this include him. Slytherins, on the other hand, clapped as he walked past them, whistling and cheering. "Thanks, Potter, we have you on!" Only Ron stood by him. "They will all forget this in a few weeks. Fred and George have lost loads of points in their time they've been here, and people still like them. They'll never lost 150 points in one go, thought that way," said Harry miserably. "Well, no," Ron admitted. It was a bit late to repair the damage, but Harry swore to himself not to meddle in things this weren't his business from now on. He'd had it with the sneaking around in spine. He felt so ashamed on himself that he went to Wood and offered to resign from the Quidditch team. Resign? Wood thundered. What good will that do? How are we going to get any points back if we can't win the Quidditch? But even Quidditch had lost its fun. The rest of the team wouldn't speak to Harry during practice. As if they had to speak about him, they called him the Seeker. Hermione and Neville were suffering too. They didn't have as bad time as Harry because they weren't as well known, but nobody would speak to them either. Hermione had stopped drawing attention to herself in class, keeping her head down and working in silence. Harry was almost glad that the exams weren't far away. All the revision he had to do kept his mind off his misery. He, Ron, and Hermione kept to themselves working late into the night, trying to remember the ingredients in complained potions, learn charms and spells off by heart, memorize the dates of magical discoveries and goblin rebellions. Then, about a week before the exams then due to start, Harry knew a resolution not to influence anything that didn't concern him was put to an expected test. Walking back to the library on his own one afternoon, he heard somebody whistling and whimpering from a classroom up ahead. As he drew closer, he heard Quirrell's voice. No, not again, please. It sounded as though someone was threatening him. Harry moved closer. All right, he heard Quirrell sob. Next second, Quirrell came hurrying out of the classroom, straightening his turban. He was pale and looked as though he was about to cry. He strode out of sight. Harry didn't think Quirrell had ever noticed him. He waited until Quirrell's footsteps had disappeared, then peered into the classroom.